Friends, before we dive in, make sure to subscribe to my channel, hit the notification bell so you never miss a new audiobook, and give this video a thumbs up. Thank you in advance. The Rogue of Redania. They say a man's character is revealed not in how he wins his honors, but in how he faces his end. My end was to be a spectacle. A lesson carved in flesh for the good people of Novigrad, delivered on the point of a headsman's axe. The rain, a persistent, grimy drizzle, did nothing to wash the stink of the crowd from the air, only mingled it with the whetstone and their own eager sweat. They had come to see the wolf of Novigrad lose his head. I stood on the scaffold, the rough-hewn wood splintering beneath my bare feet. My hands, bound behind me, were numb. The royal herald's voice was a tinny drone, listing my crimes: treason against the crown of Redania, conspiracy with Nilfgaardian agents, the murder of 3 fellow knights in cold blood. Lies, all of them, woven with such meticulous poison by the court that the truth had become a ghost, unseen and unheard. I did not look at the faces in the square. I looked past them, to the gargoyles leering from the gables of the temple district, their stone faces twisted in perpetual mockery. They were the only audience worthy of the farce. My life, my name, my honor, all reduced to this: a stage play for gargoyles and gawkers. The headsman, a mountain of a man in a black hood, tested the edge of his blade with a thumb. The sound was a soft, lethal whisper. This was it then. Not a duel in the sun, with steel ringing a noble song, but a butchery in the rain. A fitting end for a fallen wolf. I closed my eyes, not in prayer, but to conjure one last, clean memory, the scent of saddle leather and the feel of a good sword in my hand, before the world turned to rot. A voice cut through the drizzle, sharp and clear as shattering crystal. A stay of execution. My eyes snapped open. The crowd parted like a frightened sea. She moved through them not as a woman, but as a force of nature, a sliver of midnight in the pallid day. Her robes were the color of a starless sky, and her hair, a cascade of obsidian, was held back by a silver circlet. A sorceress. Of course! Who else would walk through a death crowd without a flicker of fear? She ascended the scaffold steps, her gaze sweeping over the herald, the headsman, and finally, settling on me. Her eyes were the most unsettling shade of violet, ancient and knowing. In them I saw not pity, but assessment. She was looking at a tool and weighing its usefulness. By the authority vested in the Lodge of Sorceresses, I claim this man, she announced, her voice carrying to the farthest corners of the square without seeming to rise above a conversational tone. His sentence is commuted. He is remanded to my custody. A furious whisper ran through the crowd. The herald puffed out his chest. My Lady Lyanna, this is highly irregular. The sentence has been passed by the royal court itself. The lodge, she said, her lips curving into a smile that held no warmth, finds the court's evidence lacking. And our needs are more pressing than their politics. She turned those violet eyes fully on me. Cael Baron, your life is forfeit, but I am offering you a currency more valuable, a chance to buy back your honor. I found my voice a ragged thing. And why would a sorceress of the lodge need a disgraced duelist? Not a duelist, she corrected softly. A protector. There is a young woman. Her name is Lyanna. She is unique. A talent that has drawn unwanted attention from powers you cannot comprehend. She is hunted. Your task is to ensure she is not caught. A bodyguard? I nearly laughed. You have armies. You have magic. What use am I? You are a wolf, Lord Varen. And we are sending her into the deepest, darkest parts of the woods. Your particular set of teeth may prove more effective than an army. You will take her to a safe house in the north of Redania, a place called Blackwater Keep. You will keep her alive. You will keep her secret. She leaned closer, and I caught the scent of ozone and cold stone. Succeed, and the crown's pardon will be yours. Your lands, your title, your so-called honor, all restored. Your life, your own again. Failure was implied. It hung in the air, heavier than the headsman's axe. But the alternative was the cold finality of the block. A slow death of shame, or a swift one in some cursed forest. The choice was no choice at all. I accept, I said, the words tasting of ash. Ivana nodded, a flicker of satisfaction in her ancient eyes. With a wave of her hand, the ropes around my wrists fell away, smoking slightly. The feeling returning to my hands was 1,000 painful needles. Freedom, it seemed, would hurt. They gave me back my clothes, the fine black leathers and linen of a nobleman, now stained with the filth of a dungeon cell, and my sword. The weight of the blade at my hip was the only familiar thing in a world turned upside down. I was not taken to a palace or a lodge chapter house. Instead, I was led to a nondescript tavern on the edge of the city, the kind of place where deals were made and lives forgotten. She was waiting in a shadowed booth at the back. Lyanna Vess. She was nothing like what I had expected. I had pictured some imperious novice, robed in silks and dripping with arrogance. This girl was a wisp of a thing, drowning in a heavy woolen cloak. Her hands were clasped tightly around a tankard of untouched ale. When she looked up as I approached, I felt a jolt, deep and unsettling. Her eyes were the color of a summer forest, a vibrant, impossible green, but shadowed with a fear so profound it was like a physical chill emanating from her. She was pale, her features delicate, framed by strands of hair the color of old copper that had escaped her hood. She was beautiful, but it was a fractured, fragile beauty, like a porcelain doll left out in a storm. "This is your charge," Ivana said from behind me. "Lyanna, this is Cael Varen. He will see you to safety." Lyanna's gaze met mine, and for a heartbeat, I saw not a frightened girl, but a flicker of something else, a deep, resonant power, a loneliness that echoed my own. Then it was gone, replaced by sheer, unadulterated terror. "The wolf of Novigrad," she whispered, her voice husky. "They sent me a man sentenced to die." "They sent you a man with nothing left to lose," I corrected, my tone harsher than I intended. "Which makes me the best man for the job. We leave at first light. Try to keep up." I turned and walked away, leaving the sorceress and her precious, terrified charge in the gloom. But as I reached the door, I chanced to look back. The shadows in the corner of the room seemed to shift, coalescing around Lyanna's form as if drawn to her, clinging to the folds of her cloak like loyal hounds. And in that moment, I understood. Ivana hadn't hired a wolf to guard a lamb. She had hired a wolf to guard something far more dangerous. The rain had not ceased. It fell upon the cobblestones of Novigrad's outer districts with a dreary persistence, turning the refuse in the gutters into a foul soup. Our horses, a pair of sturdy, unremarkable bays procured by Ivana's agents, slogged through the muck, their hooves making thick, sucking sounds. We rode in a silence as heavy as the air, a world away from the triumphant processions I'd once led through these very streets. Lyanna rode ahead of me, a small, hunched figure in her cloak. She hadn't spoken since we'd left the tavern, her silence a wall as tangible as the city's outer ramparts. I kept my distance, my senses tuned not to her, but to the world around us, the cry of a fishmonger, the rattle of a cart, the too casual glance of a man leaning in a doorway. Every shadow was a potential knife, every face a mask for an assassin. This was the reality of my pardon. Not a return to glory, but a descent into the underworld of Redania, a glorified nursemaid to a girl who flinched at her own shadow. The bitterness was a familiar taste on my tongue, a poison I'd grown accustomed to. We passed beneath the massive arch of the city gate, the portcullis looming overhead like a row of iron teeth. The open road stretched before us, a ribbon of churned mud winding through fields gone to weed. The sense of space, after months in a lightless cell, was dizzying, almost threatening. It was then that Lyanna finally spoke, her voice so soft it was nearly swallowed by the rain and the wind. "They say you killed 3 men. In a duel." I urged my horse alongside hers. "They say many things. Did you?" She didn't look at me, her gaze fixed on the road ahead. "I've killed more than 3 men," I said, the words flat. "But not the ones they accused me of. They were my friends. Their deaths were the foundation of the lie that buried me." She absorbed this, her silence more questioning than any words could be. "It was a setup," I continued, the confession torn from me by the grim intimacy of the road. "A challenge issued and accepted. But when I arrived, they were already dead. Slaughtered not with a duelist's precision, but with a butcher's frenzy. And I stood there, my sword clean, surrounded by the butchered bodies of my brothers in arms, just as the city guard arrived. A convenient patsy. The corrupt Prince Halvard needed a scapegoat for his own treachery, and the great wolf of Novigrad, proud and isolated, fit the role perfectly. For the first time, she turned her head, those forest green eyes searching my face. "Why are you telling me this?" "So you understand the man you're traveling with," I said, meeting her gaze. "I am not a hero. I am a weapon, purchased for a price. Do not look to me for salvation. They are not the same thing." She flinched, and I felt a petty stab of satisfaction. Better she fear the reality of me than cling to some foolish hope. Hope got people killed. We rode until the light began to fail, the gray sky deepening to the color of a bruise. I found a shelter in the shell of an old watchtower, its top crumbled to ruin, but the lower chamber still sound. I lit no fire. The cold and the dark were preferable to a beacon announcing our location. I tossed her a strip of dried venison and a hard roll from my saddlebag. She took them without a word, settling herself against the far wall, putting as much distance between us as the small space allowed. I took the first watch, leaning against the stone frame of the empty doorway, watching the rain-shrouded landscape. The hours bled together, the only sounds the drip of water and the sigh of the wind through the broken stones. My mind wandered back to the scaffold, to the feel of the rope, to the violet eyes of the sorceress. "A chance to buy back your honor." The words were a hollow echo. Honor wasn't a currency. It was a shield, and mine had been shattered. You couldn't glue the pieces back together and pretend it was whole. A sound pulled me from my thoughts. A soft, choked sob. I turned. Lyanna was curled into a ball, her shoulders shaking. The moonlight, weak and filtered through cloud, caught the silver tracks of tears on her cheeks. She was trying to stifle the sound, to bury her grief in the folds of her cloak. The sight of it, this raw, helpless sorrow, should have irritated me. Instead, it pricked at something old and buried deep within me, a memory of my own helplessness, the night they dragged me from my estate in chains. "Tears won't help you," I said, my voice rough in the quiet. She started, wiping furiously at her face. "I'm not crying for myself." "Then who for?" "For everyone," she whispered, her voice thick. "For the man who died today because of me." I straightened. "What man?" "The one who was following us since we left the city. He was in the trees about a half-mile back." She gestured vaguely into the darkness. "He's not there anymore." A cold knot tightened in my gut. I had seen, heard, sensed nothing. "How do you know?" She looked down at her hands, clenched in her lap. "The shadows, they tell me things. They whisper." I felt his intention. It was like a sliver of ice. And then, it just stopped. I was across the room in 3 strides, kneeling before her, my hand going to the hilt of my sword. "Stopped how? Did he leave?" She shook her head, her eyes wide and terrified in the gloom. The shadows around her seemed to deepen, to pulse with a life of their own. "No, he fell." I felt his silence. It was so sudden. I stared at her, the implications crashing over me. A man had been following us. A trained man, skilled enough to evade my notice. And this girl, this trembling, weeping girl, had known. Had felt him die. My mind raced back to the tavern, to the shadows clinging to her. Her power to control shadows. Ivana's words took on a new, terrifying dimension. "Did you?" I couldn't finish the question. "No." The word was a desperate gasp. I don't do anything. It just happens. When I'm scared. The shadows, they act. They protect." She hugged herself, rocking slightly. "I'm a monster." In that moment, she wasn't a powerful enchantress, a piece in some grand, prophetic game. She was a frightened young woman, cursed with a power she could not control, a power that killed without her command. The bitter anger I'd been nursing towards her, towards my situation, evaporated, replaced by a cold, grim understanding. Ivana hadn't just hired me to protect her from the hunters. She had hired me to protect the world from her. I did not reach out to comfort her. There was no comfort to give. Instead, I rose and returned to my post by the door, my gaze scanning the darkness with a new, feverish intensity. The rain continued to fall. The wind continued to howl. But now I was listening for a different kind of silence. The silence she could create. We were not a fallen knight and a precious cargo. We were a lit fuse and a powder keg, traveling together through the dark. And the first spark had already flown. The silence that settled between us after her confession was a new thing. It was no longer the empty quiet of strangers, but a thick, charged thing, heavy with unspoken horrors. I watched her, this girl monster, this weeping weapon, and saw the truth of my charge. It wasn't just about warding off blades in the night. It was about keeping the storm inside her from breaking loose. We rode harder the next day, pushing the horses, putting distance between us and the patch of woods where a man had died for the crime of following too closely. I no longer saw Lyanna's hunched shoulders as a sign of weakness, but as the containment of a terrible, volatile force. Every flicker of emotion across her face, a flinch at a bird's sudden cry, a grimace at the jolting gait of her horse, was now a potential trigger. My duty was to be a dam, holding back a flood I could not see, only feel in the unnatural chill that sometimes emanated from her. The land grew wilder, the cultivated fields giving way to dense, ancient forest. The pines stood like sentinels, their branches weaving a canopy that turned the day to perpetual twilight. This was the heart of Redania, old and cursed and forgotten. The perfect place to hide a secret, or to lose one. On the third evening, we found refuge in a hunter's lean-to, a crude structure of woven branches against a rocky outcrop. The air was cold and clean, scented of pine and damp earth. I risked a small fire, reasoning that the smoke would be lost in the vastness of the woods, and the warmth was a necessity. The fear-induced chill coming from Lyanna was more than enough. She sat close to the flames, her hands extended, but she didn't seem to feel the heat. She just stared into the dancing light, her face a mask of exhaustion and despair. "You need to eat," I said, handing her another strip of venison. She took it, but made no move to eat. "Do you think he was alone?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "The man in the woods? It doesn't matter. He's gone. Because of me." It wasn't a question. "Because of his choices," I countered, my tone harder than I felt. "He chose to hunt you. The consequence found him. Morality is a luxury for those who live in lighted halls. Out here, there is only cause and effect. You are the effect." She finally looked at me, the firelight catching the green in her eyes, making them seem like deep, still pools. "Ivana told you what I am, didn't she? She said you could control shadows." A bitter, broken sound that was almost a laugh escaped her. "Control. She makes it sound like holding reins on a horse. It's not like that. It's a tide. It's a pressure inside my chest, behind my eyes. When I feel too much fear, anger, sorrow, it spills. And the shadows drink it. They become hungry." She wrapped her arms around herself. "When I was a child, a boy in my village pulled my hair. He wouldn't stop. I got so angry. The next day, they found him at the bottom of a well he'd walked past every day of his life. They said he slipped. But I knew. The shadows in that well, they had felt my anger. The story settled in the space between us, a dark, ugly truth. I poked at the fire with a stick, sending up a shower of sparks. So the stories are true. The Lodge has always sought out children with a gift. They take them to Aretuza to learn control. I was never taken, she said, her voice hollow. My power, it's different. It doesn't come from chaos, not in the way theirs does. It's older, wilder. They call it a prophecy because they don't understand it. They just know it's powerful, and they're terrified of it falling into the hands of the Wild Hunt, or the Nilfgaardians, or any of the other scavengers circling the continent. So they hide me. They cage the bird and hope it doesn't learn to sing a song that breaks the bars. Her words painted a stark picture of her life, a commodity, a threat, a problem to be managed. I understood that feeling all too well. We were two sides of the same tarnished coin, the weapon and the scapegoat. Why did you agree to this? I asked. To come with me? Her gaze was unwavering. For the same reason you did. I had no choice. It was this, or be entombed in a lodge dungeon forever, studied like a rare insect. Ivana promised me a life, a semblance of one at least, at Blackwater Keep, a place where I couldn't hurt anyone. She looked down at her hands. And she sent you. A man with no past, no future, and no reason to care if I live or die. From her perspective, it's a perfect arrangement. The brutal logic of it was inescapable. We were the perfect, broken pieces for this broken game. The fire crackled, the only sound in the vast, listening dark of the forest. The shadows beyond our circle of light seemed deeper now, more conscious. I found myself watching them, wondering if they were watching me back. I won't let the shadows take you, I said, the promise surprising me as much as her. It was a foolish vow. How could I fight a darkness that lived inside her? She offered me a small, sad smile, the first I had ever seen on her face. It transformed her, etching a heartbreaking vulnerability there. You can't stop the tide, Cael. You can only hope to build a wall high enough. That night, as I took my watch, leaning against the rocky outcrop, I didn't just watch the trees for men with knives. I watched the darkness that clung to Lyanna as she slept, a restless, fitful slumber. I saw it shift and stir with her dreams, a living blanket of night that seemed to breathe with her. It was both terrifying and profoundly sad. The wolf of Novigrad, who had once faced down entire armies with steel and arrogance, was now a sentinel against a young woman's nightmares. And for the first time since I'd climbed onto the scaffold, the goal of reclaiming my honor felt like a distant, petty thing. There was a more immediate, more primal purpose taking root in the cursed soil of my soul, to be the wall against her tide. The hunt was on, the conspiracy was vast, but here, in this moment, the world had shrunk to a small fire, a sleeping girl, and the whispering shadows that loved her. And I knew, with a certainty that was as dark as the woods around us, that to save her, I would have to first understand the monster she held at bay and the one I was becoming to keep her safe. The days bled into a grim rhythm of travel and vigilance. The woods grew denser, the path less a road and more a suggestion worn into the moss and loam. We spoke little, but the silence had changed again. It was no longer charged with fear or horror, but with a tense, shared purpose. We were two ghosts haunting the same stretch of wilderness, bound by a fate neither of us had chosen. I found myself studying her, not as a charge, but as a puzzle. I watched how she moved, a quiet grace that seemed to absorb sound, how her gaze would sometimes grow distant, fixed on nothing, and the shadows around her would subtly deepen, as if leaning in to listen. She was learning to sense my moods, too. She could tell by the set of my shoulders when I was tense, by the direction of my gaze when I thought I'd seen movement. We were becoming a single, wary organism, a beast with two backs and one desperate instinct: survival. It was on the 7th day that we found the first sign that our hunters were more than just a lone assassin. We came across a clearing, a place where a great oak had fallen, its roots clawing at the sky like the fingers of a buried giant. And nailed to the largest of those roots was a deer, or what was left of one. It had been flayed, its skin peeled back with a ritualistic precision that had nothing to do with hunting for meat. Its entrails were arranged in a spiraling pattern on the forest floor, already buzzing with flies. The air was thick with the stench of blood and something else, something metallic and old: ozone, like the air after a lightning strike. Lyanna made a small, choked sound and turned away, pressing her face into her horse's neck. I dismounted, my sword in my hand before my feet hit the ground. This was not the work of wolves or even a rogue witcher. This was a message, a signature. Wild hunt, I breathed, the words tasting of frost and ash. The stories were old, told to frighten children. Spectral riders from another world who swept across the land to harvest souls. But I'd seen the scorched earth left in their wake during the last war. They were no myth. They were a plague, and they were interested in Lyanna. "They're tracking us," Lyanna whispered, her voice trembling. She hadn't looked at the carcass, but she knew. "They can smell my blood. It's like a beacon to them." I looked from the brutalized animal to her pale, terrified face. The lodge, the Redanian court, and now the wild hunt. The noose was tightening. Blackwater Keep, our supposed sanctuary, felt a continent away. "We need to move faster," I said, my voice grim. That night, we didn't stop. We rode through the darkness, the horses stumbling on the unseen routes, the moon our only guide. The forest felt alive, malevolent. Every creak of a branch was the footstep of a specter, every hoot of an owl was a mocking cry. Lyanna clung to her saddle, her knuckles white. The pressure I'd felt from her before was building, a palpable tension in the air that made the hairs on my arms stand on end. Just before dawn, as a sickly gray light began to filter through the trees, we heard it. A sound that froze the blood in my veins. It was a low, resonant horn, not of this world. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, vibrating through the trees and the very ground beneath us. It was the sound of frozen stars and dead worlds. "The horn of the hunt," Lyanna cried out, clapping her hands over her ears. Her horse reared, whinnying in terror. And then the temperature dropped. It was a sudden, violent plunge, as if we had ridden into the heart of an iceberg. Frost bloomed across the leather of my saddle, white and intricate. Our breath plumed in the air, thick as smoke. "Cael," Lyanna gasped, her eyes wide with a terror that went beyond fear. It was recognition. They emerged from the trees not as men, but as fragments of the void given form. 3 riders atop steeds of smoke and hoarfrost. Their armor was ancient, ornate, and seemed to drink the weak light, reflecting nothing. The air around them shimmered with a cold that hurt to look at. The lead rider, his helm crowned with antlers of black ice, turned its gaze upon us. There were no eyes within that helm, only 2 points of cold blue fire. I drew my sword, the ring of steel absurdly small and mortal against the spectral silence. I was a wolf, yes, but this was a pack of winter itself. I knew, with a certainty that was both terrifying and calm, that my steel would be useless against them. This was not a fight I could win. The lead rider pointed a gauntlet finger, not at me, but at Lyanna. "Daughter of Shadow," a voice echoed in my mind, dry and rasping like wind over a frozen plain. "You're called. The king of the hunt awaits his bride." Lyanna slid from her horse, her legs buckling beneath her. She knelt in the frost-hardened earth, shaking, not in fear now, but in a terrible, internal struggle. The shadows around her erupted, not as a formless cloud, but as sharp, grasping tendrils of pure night, lashing out at the spectral cold. "No," she whispered, then screamed it. No. The power that erupted from her was not the passive, defensive chill I had felt before. It was a wave of pure, black energy. It didn't extinguish the light, it devoured it. The world vanished into an absolute silent dark. I couldn't see my own hand in front of my face. I couldn't hear my own heartbeat. It was the void, and in that void I felt it. A wave of anguish so profound it was a physical force. It was her grief, her rage, her loneliness, every dark emotion she had ever swallowed, given form and unleashed. It was the death of the man in the woods, magnified 1,000-fold. The silence lasted only a heartbeat, 2 at most. Then the darkness snapped back, recoiling into her as if sucked into a singularity. The clearing was visible again. The frost was gone. The temperature was normal. The riders were gone. But Lyanna lay crumpled on the ground, unconscious, a trickle of blood seeping from her nose. And the ancient oak tree, the one with the flayed deer, was now a petrified, blackened husk, as if it had been burned in a fire that gave no heat. I stood there, sword in hand, my body trembling not from cold, but from the aftershock of what I had witnessed. I had seen battles. I had seen magic. I had never seen anything like that. She hadn't just driven them away. She had erased them. I sheathed my sword and went to her, lifting her limp form into my arms. She was feather-like cold. The monster had spent itself, leaving only the broken girl. As I carried her to her horse, my mind reeled, not with fear of her, but with a dawning, terrifying realization. The lodge wasn't just hiding her from the hunt. They were hiding the hunt from her. And the bond Lyanna had spoken of, the one that could ignite a war or bring redemption, it was no longer about my honor or her safety. It was about what we would become together. The fallen knight, a man of steel and guilt. And the living shadow, a girl of emotion and absolute power. We were an echo in the blood, a song that was just beginning, and its first note had been one of utter, world-shattering ruin. She was unconscious for a day and a night. I found a shallow cave, little more than a scrape in a hillside, and carried her inside. There was nothing to do but wait. I tended to the horses, I kept watch, and I watched her. The profound silence that had followed her eruption of power had been replaced by a deep, unnerving stillness. The forest itself seemed to be holding its breath, afraid to disturb her. When she finally stirred, it was with a soft groan. Her eyes fluttered open, the green dulled with exhaustion and confusion. For a moment, she didn't seem to know where she was or who I was. Then memory returned, and with it, a wave of such profound shame that she curled away from me. "Don't," I said, my voice rough from disuse. "Don't turn away from it." She stilled, her back to me. "How many?" she whispered, her voice cracked. "How many what? Did I kill this time?" I thought of the petrified oak, the absolute void, the vanished riders. None that didn't deserve it. She let out a shuddering breath. "You don't understand. It's not about deserving. It's a hunger, and it's never full." She finally turned to look at me, her eyes haunted. You saw what I am. I saw what you can do," I corrected, holding her gaze. "There's a difference." The words felt inadequate, but they were all I had. The girl who had wept in the watchtower was still in there, but she was now fused to a power that could unmake the world. My task was no longer to protect a victim, but to steady a force of nature. Her hand lifted, trembling as if to touch my chest, to see if I was real. Before her fingers could make contact, A violent shudder ran through the entire tower. Dust rained down from the ceiling. From outside, above the howl of the wind, came a sound that was neither horn nor beast, but a tearing of the world's fabric, a sound I had only heard once before, in the moments before the wild hunt had appeared. The moment shattered. The fragile connection between us snapped, replaced by the immediate, visceral threat. Lyanna's eyes widened, not with fear, but with a grim, resigned fury. The shadows in the corners of the room began to writhe, stretching towards her like loyal soldiers answering a silent summons. "The wall is about to be tested," I said, my hand falling to the hilt of my sword. She nodded, her delicate features hardening into a mask of terrible resolve. "Then let it break." The sound did not fade. It deepened, becoming a physical pressure in the air, a vibration that set my teeth on edge and made the ancient stones of Blackwater keep groan in protest. It was the sound of reality being peeled back, a wound opening in the world. We ran from the library, our moment of fragile intimacy shattered by the imminent storm. In the great hall, the fire in the hearth guttered and died, not from the wind, but from a sudden, profound cold that leached all warmth from the air. Frost painted the walls in intricate, frantic patterns. Havel, the caretaker, stood frozen in the center of the room, his face a mask of primordial terror. "The hunt," he whispered, his voice a dry rattle. "They have come for the witch." Lyanna did not flinch at the word. She stood straight, her small form seeming to draw the gathering darkness to her. The shadows in the hall thickened, pulling around her feet like a loyal hound. "They've come for what's inside me," she corrected, her voice eerily calm. "And I will not give it to them." I drew my sword, the steel looking pitifully mundane against the supernatural onslaught. "Havel, bar the door." It was a futile gesture, but ritual was all we had left. The old man didn't move. He just stared at the main door, which began to shudder in its frame, ice crystallizing around the iron hinges. Then, with a splintering crash, it exploded inward. Not one, but a dozen of the spectral riders filled the doorway, their form shifting between solidity and mist. The lead rider, the one with the antlered helm, stepped through the wreckage. The points of blue fire that were his eyes fixed on Lyanna. "The game is over, daughter of shadow. Your power belongs to the Anel. You will come, or this world will be scoured of every life that shelters you." His gaze swept over me, a dismissive flicker of cold flame. "Starting with this mortal shell you cling to." Before I could move, before I could even form a thought of defiance, Lyanna stepped forward. And she changed. It was not the uncontrolled eruption of power from the forest. This was different. This was a conscious, terrible unleashing. The shadows did not just gather around her, they became her. They flowed up her body like living armor, a second skin of woven night. Her eyes, those vibrant green pools, were swallowed by an endless, starless black. Her copper hair seemed to bleed into the darkness, a banner of void. "You think you can take it?" Her voice was a chorus, 1,000 whispers of darkness speaking as one. The sound echoed not in the hall, but in the mind. "Come and try." The lead rider gestured, and 2 of his spectral warriors lunged forward, their frost-covered blades humming with alien energy. I moved to intercept, a roar of defiance tearing from my throat. But I was too slow. Lyanna, or the entity she had become, simply lifted a hand. The shadows at the feet of the riders congealed into solid, black spears of ice-cold darkness. They shot upward, impaling the warriors. There was no scream, no clatter of armor. The riders simply dissolved, their forms unraveling into motes of fading light that were then swallowed by the hungry dark. The remaining hunters hesitated. The air grew colder still. The antlered knight took a step forward, raising his own blade, a shard of frozen lightning. You cannot win. Your emotion is your chain. It will break you. No. The chorus of shadows replied, Lyanna's form a nexus of swirling night at its center. It is my weapon. The pressure in the room intensified, a psychic scream of rage and grief and centuries of loneliness. It was Lyanna's heart, laid bare and weaponized. Tapestries on the walls crumbled to dust. The stone floor beneath the hunters cracked, and from the fissures, more shadows erupted, shapes of claw and tooth and blind hunger. It was not a battle. It was an annihilation. The riders were torn apart, not by force, but by the void itself. Their cold was extinguished by a deeper cold. Their light was eaten by a greater dark. The antlered knight fought, his blade carving arcs of freezing energy, but the shadows simply flowed around it, swallowing the light, swallowing the sound, swallowing him. He vanished with a final, silent scream that echoed only in my soul. And then, as suddenly as it began, it was over. The cold was gone. The pressure vanished. The great hall of Blackwater Keep was a wreck, scarred by frost and strange, blackened fissures. The main door was gone, revealing the misty, pre-dawn light over the lake. Lyanna stood in the center of the devastation. The shadows retreated from her, slinking back into the corners of the room, leaving her standing alone. She swayed on her feet, the terrible power gone, and collapsed. I caught her before she hit the ground. She was ice cold, her skin pale as marble. A thin trail of blood leaked from her nose and the corner of her eye. She was breathing, but each breath was a shallow, ragged thing. Hovel was gone, fled or dust, I didn't know. I didn't care. I carried Lyanna upstairs to the only habitable chamber, laying her on the rough-hewn bed. I built a fire, wrapped her in every fur I could find, and waited. The sun rose, its weak light doing nothing to dispel the chill that had settled in my own bones. I had seen her power. I had seen her become a goddess of destruction. And I had seen the broken mortal cost. She slept for 2 days. When she woke, her eyes were green again, but haunted by a knowledge that could never be erased. Did I? She began, her voice a raw whisper. They're gone, I said, cutting her off. I brought a cup of water to her lips. You saved us. She drank, then turned her face away. At what cost? I didn't have an answer. The cost was written on her face, in the tremble of her hands. The cost was the absolute truth of what she was, now undeniable. The conspiracy of the crown and the lodge was a petty squabble compared to the war she had just ended with a thought. Weeks turned into a month. We repaired what we could of the keep. We did not speak of the hunt. We did not speak of the future. We existed in a fragile, present tense. I trained with my sword in the courtyard, the movements a meditation. She walked the shores of the Black Lake, the shadows following her at a respectful distance, no longer wild, but tamed. Or perhaps she was taming herself. One evening, I found her in the library again, standing before the same tapestry. the night and the shadow dragon. She reached out and touched the woven shadow. He was wrong, you know, she said softly. The knight in the shiny armor. Oh, he didn't lose because the shadow got in. She turned to me, and for the first time since the attack, her gaze was clear, without shame or terror. There was only a profound, weary acceptance. He lost because he was fighting it. He was trying to destroy it. She let her hand fall. You can't destroy a shadow. You can only make peace with the light that casts it. I looked at her, truly looked at her. Not as the wolf of Novigrad, not as her protector, not as a man seeking redemption. I saw the girl, the monster, the woman. I saw the light and the shadow inextricably linked. I crossed the room and stood before her. I did not reach for my sword. I did not offer empty comfort. I simply looked at her and let her see the man I had become, a man whose past was a scar, not a wound, whose honor was not a thing to be reclaimed, but a new path to be forged. With her. Then let us learn to live with the shadows, Lyanna, I said, my voice low. Both yours and mine. A true smile, small and fragile, but real, touched her lips. It was the first dawn after a long and terrible night. Outside, the wind whispered across the dark water of the lake. Somewhere, a continent simmered with conspiracies and war. The Lodge would want a report. The Crown would still want my head. The Wild Hunt would not forget. But in the Keep of Blackwater, for now, there was only silence and the slow, careful sound of two broken things beginning, at last, to heal. And so, the bond between the cursed night and the forbidden witch was sealed, not in gold or glory, but in shadow and understanding. Their story continues, a single flame against the coming dark. If you were captivated by the dark, sensual world of Cael and Lyanna, if their slow-burn passion and tragic undertones resonated with you, then you have a home here at Velvet Valor Romantasy Audiobook. We specialize in tales where love is a dangerous magic and heroes are painted in shades of gray. Subscribe to the channel so you never miss a story. Your subscription is the key that unlocks our next epic. Let us know what you thought. Leave a comment below. Who was your favorite character? Which moment left you breathless? Your voice is part of our tapestry. And if you wish to support us in weaving more tales of Velvet and Valor, please like this video and share it with a fellow dreamer. It helps more listeners find their way to our keep. Thank you for listening. Until the next adventure in the shadows, we remain.